I don't want to, show off, but if I showed you Transit app on my phone, you could see it because I have access to the
You have
test
the
feed.
special insider program.
I know. It really could be, within the next week or two that this is rolled out publicly.
Welcome to the Streets.mn podcast, the show where we highlight how transportation and land use can make our communities better places. Coming to you from beautiful uptown Minneapolis, Minnesota, I am your host, Ian R. Buck. A few episodes ago, you heard us discussing OpenStreetMap, and one of our favorite apps that uses the data is the Transit app. The company behind it recently partnered with Metro Transit and MnDOT to bring the app's premium features to every user in Minnesota. So we sat down with representatives from each agency.
I'm Laura Matson. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the manager of data and business systems in the customer experience department at Metro Transit.
My name is Kathy Schultz. I am the transit technology program manager with the Minnesota Department of Transportation.
I'm Stephen Miller. I am the policy lead at the Transit app.
This episode was produced by Parker Seaman. So Parker, why don't you tell us what got you interested in this topic?
For sure. My dissertation research is into transit information, specifically in ridership tracking, and I thought this would be an interesting conversation to have to kind of get some more insight into how Transit app works when it's collaborating with different agencies, because we're not the first one you guys have collaborated with for this, if I believe correctly. Which then brings up the question of when something like this is getting started, like who's going to who first? Are you going out to different agencies and talking to them and saying, hey, we have this thing that we work on, thing that we do, or did Metro Transit or MnDOT come out first and go, hey, Transit app, I like what you guys are doing. Can we work out something here?
So the basis of everything is fundamentally open data and data standards. Before we get to any business relationship, it's really about the data, right? So transit data, there's a format called GTFS, and all transit agencies provide this information publicly available, not just to Transit app, but to Google Maps, Apple Maps, whoever wants to create a navigation tool. And so that's really where it starts. We integrate that data. There's a whole history of GTFS and related data specifications I'm sure we can get into. But we integrate that data at the Transit app and then kind of go out there in the market, right, and offer what we think is the best app to riders. So, we build a user base independently, and that's what I think gets us on the radar of the public authorities. We work with them already on data issues when there's, let's say, an error in data, or we have a question about a change that they've made in their GTFS. We're already in touch with the agencies. Oftentimes we're responding to an RFP that transit agencies put out there. They have identified the need for something and then go out to the market and pick among various companies. Usually that's how it goes. So we keep an eagle eye out for what transit agencies are asking for in their RFPs. But there's all sorts, the transit world is a small one, and there's all sorts of discussions about, okay, well, here's what we offer, and okay, here's what you're interested in looking at, and it's a constantly evolving space, but we're usually responding to the inquiry from an agency.
Yeah. So Laura, was that what you had on your end with getting started with this? Was putting out a RFP for collaboration like that?
No, in this case, it wasn't. I would echo what Stephen said, that we had a longstanding relationship collaborating on data quality issues or missing data issues, and also working together to advance the GTFS, the specification, to cover new data formats to cover more cases or operational experiences in the Transit app. Our collaborators at Transit app are very active and leading in that space. I would say that was our primary relationship with them, for at least the last 10 years. And there's been increasing interest within Metro Transit, specifically around how can we improve the customer experience and how can we hear more directly from customers when they're riding how things are going. And so Transit offered us a free trial of subscribing to this Rate My Ride feature. And we found that it was a economical and useful way to hear directly from riders. We have lots of engagement strategies. We do our own surveys, but we didn't have anything like Rate My Ride, that you knew a rider was actually on the bus, they were actually taking this trip, and they were telling you, is the vehicle clean or not? Is the stop clean or not? Was the bus on time? And we thought it was a really rich data set, and so figured out this partnership. This was a unique offering in the market, so it wasn't actually through an RFP. It was they call it a sole source. And part of it, so for Metro Transit, we subscribe to Rate My Ride, and then we want people to answer the questions. We want to meet riders where they're at. So we also unlocked Royale in the region as part of that partnership.
So Stephen, that kind of jumps me to the question about like this, these Rate My Ride surveys that, people have the opportunity to answer while they are riding a bus. Are those questions that pop up only in regions where Transit App has that relationship with the transit agency for that data sharing, or are you collecting that data regardless, and then that's an enticing like, hey, come and partner with us so we can share this data with you?
So we have different types of questions that we ask in different places. We have what we call global questions, which are asked everywhere. And then we have custom questions, which can be added by an agency that we're partnering with. So just to give some context for what Rate My Ride is, in the Transit app, there's a feature called Go, which is a step-by-step navigator. So it'll tell you when to leave the house. It'll tell you when your stop is coming up on the bus or the train. And while you're using Go, you are also crowdsourcing information about your transit ride automatically, even without answering questions. Once the app detects that you're on board a transit vehicle, we then supplement the real-time location of that user into the data provided by the transit agency. So that way, the location information for that particular vehicle, for that particular trip, is updated second by second, right? So there's along with that, there's a leaderboard to see, how many people you've helped on each given trip. You can compete to be the best on your line. But also, we pose these Rate My Ride questions because we could detect, like Laura was saying, you're at the stop, you're on board this specific trip. And so those questions are universal. They're asked everywhere. Top line results are shared back in the app for a certain number of questions. So for example, we ask, did the bus come when you expected it to? And those results are shared out on a line by line basis in the app. Similarly, we ask, on a rating of 1 to 5 stars, how would you rate your trip? And those are shared back out in the app. We ask other questions because it allows a comparison between different transit agencies, which can be useful. And then there's these additional questions that transit agencies can ask, some of which we have kind of tested elsewhere and used already, but we don't want to deploy everywhere all the time. We only want to deploy them when they're useful to the transit agency. And then other questions which are entirely custom, where the transit agency works with us to kind of craft what that question looks like.
And then, Laura, how does Metro Transit use the data that Transit is sharing with you through those sources?
So it's still very much a work in progress. We're still in our first year of this partnership. So a lot of the work we've done so far is just kind of figuring out, when is this a good mechanism for gathering customer feedback? How does it work with other data we're gathering? So kind of establishing that baseline, but also looking for hotspots, looking for places like trends, like did the cleanliness on this route change over a certain amount of time? Should we have people go take a look at it? We've been referring to it internally as like a sniffer. Like, is there something that we should go investigate because customers are reporting, oh, there's been a lot of trash at this? One of the custom questions that we just recently deployed is around snow removal and trying to understand, Metro Transit clears snow from a lot of stops and a lot of stations, but we also have a lot of stops and stations that depend on nearby property owners for snow removal. So trying to understand, is that a barrier? Are there places that seems to be impeding transit access? And it's still pretty exploratory. It's not, oh, based on the answers to this, we're going to do this. But it's a useful input into the broader conversation.
I was wondering what had triggered the snow questions popping up. I was like, oh, does the app just like monitor the weather in the area and kind of like when it gets cold enough? No.
So the snow question actually came originally from Montreal, where we are headquartered. Of course, it snows a lot in Montreal as well. And out of just pure curiosity, we launched a question in the app just locally after a snowstorm. And then we took that data and then wrote a whole blog post to identify, because in Montreal, snow clearance at bus stops is done borough by borough. The city is made up of different boroughs. And so we did an analysis to look at, okay, which borough does the best at snow clearance at its bus stops? And we wrote up a whole blog post. It got written up by the local press, and it was both interesting and useful to riders, right? Because not having a stop covered in snow, days, weeks even after snowfall is just horrible. So we then started working with other transit agencies about, is this an issue for you? Do you want to look into this? And the app does not detect the weather automatically. We've had discussions internally about how we do this, if it's worth it, what do we do? And instead, the way we decided to ask it is there snow on the ground? And if yes, then it asks about the bus stop.
There you go. I have noticed that for me as an individual user, my attitude towards some of the questions changes depending on like what the weather is, right? Like when the app asks me how clean is this bus, and I'm like, I look at the ground and I'm like, well, it just snowed, and so everybody's tracking in snow, and so there's a lot of dirt and grime here, but like I kind of expect that, and so that's fine.
Right, like a bus with a bunch of salty floors in winter. It's like, that's expected.
Right.
I wouldn't expect them to mop at every end of every line.
I will say that the cleanliness of vehicles did go down in December, and the internal, maybe there was something broader going on than just like salty, dirty snow, but at the same time, I can't really say that my bus is spotless if it is covered in grime. That little spotless icon, it's just too perfect for what I'm seeing with my eyeballs.
It's very much a kind of evolutionary progress for this feature and how it works. This exact question is something that we are kind of wrestling with right now, and we work with transit agencies, not just Metro Transit, but others, to say, okay, well, how can we frame these questions as specifically and as usefully as we can? Should we be asking riders if the inside of the bus is spotless? Is spotless actually the standard we want riders to judge things by? Or is it more about how does this bus need to be cleaned? In which case you might not say spotless, but you might say, actually, no, it's fine.
Meets expectations.
Those are two different questions.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For Metro Transit, Laura, what is like, is the transit app a decent way to be reporting stuff like that? Like when we get questions from Go, or should riders kind of use the contact us part of the metrotransit.org website for getting a quicker response or more formal response? What's the preferred way there?
Great question. You should definitely contact us directly. Like if you see a vehicle or a stop in need of attention, you can submit a form at metrotransit.org or call the 612-373-3333 number. We follow up on every direct customer contact. It gets routed more quickly. transit app at this point is more used for seeing like overall trends and places to investigate. So contact us directly.
Cool.
I would just add in the transit app, when you hit the contact us button, we ask a series of questions to determine, is the issue you want to reach out about something that we can address as an app, or is it something that really should be directed to Metro Transit? And if it is, we send you to that contact form directly.
Nice. Data partnership is one aspect of this, but obviously, like, every user in the Metro Transit system, got Royale for free. So what is like the monetary relationship in this partnership? Like, who's paying whom? How is that all working? Is it a flat fee per user basis? What are we talking?
So the Metro Transit contract with Transit app is an annual fee, regardless of the number of users. And it's about $100,000 per year for unlocking Royale and about $100,000 a year for subscribing to the Rate My Ride. And there are some like nice features that come with it. We can post banner ads, which have been an effective way to reach riders about like big upcoming service changes or requesting participation or feedback in something. They also get like in-kind advertising. So that's why you see some like transit app promos on buses and at train platforms, things like that.
Before that contract was laid out and before this was announced, like how long was this in the works before it started to be announced to the public?
Oh, that's a good question. As I mentioned previously, we did do a trial period where Transit app gave us access to all the Rate My Ride data, so we were able to sort of validate that it was worth the investment. And I think that specifically, plus going through our procurement and due diligence there, probably took about 6 months. I will say the MnDOT partnership is separate also.
Yeah.
So like Metro Transit's partnership, like I mentioned, is sort of focused on these two components. But the MnDOT partnership is very cool. So Kathy should also talk about that because that's industry leading stuff.
Yeah, that was going to be our next question. I remember when, the transit app all of a sudden became an option for being able to plan trips from one city in Minnesota to another. And there was a big announcement about like, yeah, Jefferson Lines and, several other agencies were going to start appearing in the transit app when they previously had not. So yeah, Kathy, I guess you get to speak on that now. What was the history there?
There was a couple things. Partly is looking at the data standards and looking at getting information available to the traveling public for transit statewide, and understanding that our rural transit system providers typically had struggles with trying to get that data standard to a point where information was available, whether you were in Duluth or Moorhead or Bemidji, in Rochester, and how do you travel? And understanding too that the public doesn't, want to just travel within the Twin Cities or within large metropolitan areas. They want to be able to see and understand how to get information on transportation and be able to find it and use it. And so it started off with 2 grants that we received back in 2020 from Federal Transit Administration, as well as some COVID funding to look at putting 12 agencies on the table to say, let's get their data standard up and running. Let's work with them to get information out to the public, and then work on the marketing and getting the public to understand as well too how to use the app and what it looks like.
So 12 agencies, that's more than just the fixed route systems that we have in the state, right? I think we only have like 5 metro areas in the state that have fixed route. Let's delve into a little bit of the like on-demand stuff. How would we be able to like display that kind of thing in an app like the Transit app?
So integrating these demand response systems into the Transit app is honestly a very, very interesting project. So back at the beginning of the podcast, I was talking about GTFS. Over time, an extension was added to GTFS called GTFS Flex. And GTFS Flex is really for these demand response or deviated fixed route services. So for example, you have services where it runs along a fixed route, but then depending on a user calling in advance or somebody on board the bus, it will deviate off that fixed route and take them to their destination within a certain radius of that line. The other thing to keep in mind that's important is GTFS has two components. One is for static information, that is the schedules and maps of where service is operating. And then the other is for real-time information, the update of where is the bus, when is it coming, 3, 2, 1 minutes. GTFS Flex is really on the static side of the equation. So showing you where services are available, not necessarily the real-time information about that services. Transit was the first and remains the first mobile app to integrate GTFS Flex. And our first deployment was with Minnesota. So it was really, as Laura said earlier, it is kind of industry leading stuff to get these types of services, which traditionally have been operated on a pen and pad and a phone, right? Getting them into trip planning services and apps so that people who are using their smartphones can know, actually, I can take this trip. Oftentimes it's a piece of paper at the supermarket that says, to get the dial-a-ride service, call this number, right? And so making sure that is legible and that the digital world reflects the actual world is a great step forward. And I think Minnesota DOT really should get all of the praise because it deserves it for doing something that most other states do not, which is providing that level of technical assistance to its rural transit agencies.
So when I think about like the workflow from a user's perspective of using like a on-demand transit service, I'm like, okay, I look on the map to see like what are the boundaries of the service area. I input like my destination and my starting point, which is probably my current location, right? So it needs GPS data from my own phone. And then once I request a ride, it shows me like, okay, here's the little vehicle that's going to come pick you up. It's going towards you on the map. And then, when it picks you up and then you have a time estimate for how long it's going to take to get to your destination. But, maybe we'll make other stops along the way. Like how many of those different pieces that I just named does GTFS Flex like take into account?
The first half of that equation.
Okay.
So the static information is about what is the service available. The real-time information, which is the second half of what you described, is where is the vehicle, when is it coming to pick me up? So that first half of, I enter my origin, my destination, and I get back, here's what the services are that are available. Here's the schedules that they operate on. And also, here is how you can reserve and request that service. So when I was saying MnDOT is doing something that most states aren't doing, I should actually edit that. MnDOT is doing something that no state is doing, right? They are the first to get this kind of static service information about these demand response services on the digital map. That said, there is a second data standard for demand response transit. So we were talking about GTFS, which exists for buses and trains. GBFS, which I have to do a little aside here, is for bike share, car share, and scooters, but is the brainchild of a Minnesotan, of Mitch Vars, formerly of Nice Ride. So we've got to shout out Mitch and Minnesota. And then there's GOFS, which is much more recent. It's for kind of microtransit, on-demand transit. It's just getting its legs underneath it, but it does have that real-time information to say, okay, you can expect to pick up in 5 minutes, for example. And that's less for these, GOFS is less for these dial-a-ride services and more typically for taxi, ride hail, kind of on-demand microtransit.
Kathy, I have a follow-up question for you. Like, when I think about some of these smaller scale, or not smaller scale, but like rural transit agencies that don't have as many resources on their own and probably don't have like an IT person on staff, to set up and maintain, these GTFS feeds and, the server infrastructure and everything. How much support is MnDOT giving to these various different transit agencies to be able to like run all of this?
Well, the first thing that we're doing right now is actually talking with them. And that's part of my role at MnDOT, is to kind of understand where they're at least at a base. And then kind of moving forward, looking at how do we get them to a standard that we need to have them at. So through that, we're looking at funding about opportunities for the systems to be able to apply for funding for upgradings of their scheduling dispatching software, being able to have CAD AVL and information on the buses. A lot of the vehicles that we have within our rural communities aren't tracked. They don't have a GPS, kind of like as you were saying, that component of seeing the vehicle kind of go down the road and say, oh, here he is. A lot of our rural systems, our drivers get a manifest in the morning that say, pick up person A, take them to place B, and in between, it might be 30 miles. It might be across the county. It might be into another county. And that vehicle isn't necessarily being tracked.
No, yeah.
But people know dispatch knows where they're at. And so that component is having to be brought into the systems as well, too. And so those are things that MnDOT's looking at funding as we're kind of moving things forward and moving them into the future to be able to connect to a system, to be able to have that next resource. But we're in the whole walking before running mode as well, too, because we want success in this, because we do have other states that are looking at Minnesota. I have partners and colleagues in Michigan who I regularly talk to on calls to say, how are you doing this? How do we get this to work as well, too? Because they see the value. They see the value in having that information available statewide and not just in the metropolitan areas.
Yeah. Dear listener, this is Ian from the future with some very exciting news. They have indeed rolled out Metro Micro information in the Transit app. So it works exactly as Stephen describes. You can see the service area boundaries, and it will give you an estimate for a trip from one spot to another. But to book a trip, it shows you a button that sends you over to the Metro Micro app. So you heard it here, folks.
I've also heard talk of Metro Transit updating their payment system for paying for fares for the different transit vehicles available. And I know that in some areas that you can purchase your fare through the transit app. So will the fare system update of that Metro Transit is doing allow us to pay for fares in the transit app? Is something like that in the works, Laura?
It hasn't been decided yet. It's still to be determined. When we did the last RFP for the ticketing app, which is the Metro Transit app, currently it's very focused on ticketing. It didn't make sense to enable ticketing within transit, but that could change as we transition into a more open payment system.
And just to provide some context on the transit app side too, Metro Transit uses a company called Token for its mobile ticketing, which we do integrate. And in fact, is the same company that MnDOT uses for rural agencies that do mobile ticketing. But as Laura mentioned, with the advent of contactless open payments where you can tap a credit or debit card on board the bus, we are able to integrate that into the app very easily and seamlessly. The transit app will show a contactless button that when you tap it, automatically goes to your Apple Wallet or Google Wallet.
Nice.
Awesome.
What surprises have come from this partnership? Like, what are some, and how are these discoveries informing our decisions going forward?
Understanding what the landscape is, ultimately, 39 transit systems in the state of Minnesota are going to be available for public information, as a transit user, who travels around the state and the country. It's huge. And it's a big lift. And so I think that, we've got a great team in our providers who are on the street, who are working to get buses out. We have a great relationship with the transit app staff, as well as with, Optibus and Cambridge Systematics as well, who are helping with that back end GTFS finessing information, working on, bringing us out to the country and saying, look what we're doing, why don't you come along and let's build something great together.
I think, like I said earlier, we're still kind of exploring what the data can do for us. But it has been really nice to see all of the positive feedback about unlocking Royale. I mean, part of the goal of the partnership is to meet riders where they are. We're not in the business of selling app downloads or clicks. We're in the business of getting people from point A to point B. And if the public or our riders want to use a particular app, making it easier to do that is like part of providing the service. And so I would say that has been a really nice surprise. You don't always get a lot of positive feedback, but this has been a popular one.
I would just add from our side, and this applies both to Metro Transit and to MnDOT, it is very nice to have partners who challenge you to push the limits a bit, which is really, really great, right? Because, there could be a transit agency that's like, great, Royale, great, we'll take it, cool. And then that's the end of the conversation. And that's actually not that interesting from our perspective, right? It's much more interesting to have a state DOT that says, we want to be the first to digitize our statewide rural transit networks. It's much more interesting to have a transit agency in a major metropolitan area like the Twin Cities say, okay, we want to figure out what are the things we can ask of riders. How can we use the data in a way that's useful and interesting? Another great example is with MnDOT, because the transit app traditionally is used for local travel, right? It's used for point to point within a city or a region. Doing these long distance trips, our trip planner historically had a limit on it in terms of the distance because, it takes additional computing power and we wanted to limit those edge cases. That's no longer an edge case necessarily when you're going between cities using Jefferson lines. So we had to make changes to the way our trip planner and the app worked and push that limit up. And so it required us to kind of make some technological advances on our side that ended up being useful not just in Minnesota, but in lots of other regions. So discovering those challenges that come up as you do a project with partners and then figuring out ways to solve them is what's frankly most interesting from our perspective.
Which then makes me wonder when creating a relationship like this and evaluating how to continue pushing forward, how does Metro Transit evaluate when it is worthwhile to outsource work like this to a private company versus developing something in-house?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say we're continuing to invest in our website. We've just rolled out a bunch of improvements to the maps on the website, and we'll be implementing a new trip planner in the coming year that also integrates on-demand service. And so I don't see it as an either or. But in this case, Transit App provides a service that's valuable to Metro Transit, that's valuable to our riders. It's more cost effective to partner on this rather than trying to develop and maintain a Go feature with these custom questions and the data collection like it just makes more sense, like financially and logistically and basically every other way, to pursue this partnership than to try to do exactly what Transit App is doing ourselves.
Right. And it, like, thinking about it from a user's perspective, like, it is desirable to me to have one app that I can use that works in the Twin Cities and also in Chicago and also in like Clallam County, Washington, right? You know, where no matter where I go, like I know that I don't have to go and Google like that particular transit agency to figure out what app they have made, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, there's always kind of a tension between like, you know, public data and keeping it owned by the public, but then also like, you know, is that actually the best thing for all of the people who are going to be using these systems? You know, to have like all different cities and states and everything, like taking all these different approaches. And yeah, knowing that like we're doing this partnership with a private company, but a private company that is like focused on open data and, you know, and pushing those boundaries, is like, I mean, obviously everybody's going to have their own like takes on whether public partnerships are like appropriate, but you know, to me, this seems like a good approach where it's like, you know, we're not just giving everything away to a black hole and then like hoping that we get good things out of it.
I would say to that, Ian, like, I think that's correct, but the way that happens is because the relationship is based around these kind of open standards, mm-hmm. right? We couldn't exist without GTFS, right? As an app, we would not exist without the standard. And the GTFS data is publicly available, open data in a standardized format. And then we're able to build things on top of that, and then also share things back out using these standard formats. So to use a really concrete example, these Rate My Ride questions, we ask, is there a shelter at the stop? Is there a bench? Is there a bike rack? We built a module in our web dashboard for transit agencies. We call it Transit Terminal. And in that module, we take all the results that we're getting from those questions and share it back with agencies to say, here's where app users have identified benches, shelters, bike racks, et cetera. That's all well and good, but we want to be able to share that out in a way that is itself standardized so that agencies can include that information in their own data sets, right? And so Metro Transit, to their great credit, kind of pushed the ball forward by adding fields to their, we're going to get technical, stops.txt file in GTFS for these types of amenities. And that prompted a discussion among other transit agencies. The MBTA in Boston also has a different way of sharing this type of information about stop amenities. So then it started a conversation. Okay, can we standardize how we share this information so that different transit agencies can share it, so that Transit App can both share it and receive that information for display to users. And so very soon there's going to be a discussion kicked off officially in the GTFS community of, okay, here's a proposal for how we can do that, building on the work that Metro Transit has done, building on the work that Transit App has done, building on the work that other agencies like MBTA have done. And how do we create this kind of standardized way of doing it? The result of that is that it prevents anyone from being locked into a black hole, like you said.
Yeah.
You're not stuck with one company that is in charge of everything. You have this kind of open competitive space where different companies can compete to be the best, and different agencies can come up with new and better ways of doing things. So
now, and this isn't to say that like the Transit App isn't trying to find competitive advantages for yourself. Like, I am very aware when I'm using the app that like, oh yeah, I'm doing go mode because I want other users of the Transit App to have better real time bus estimates. But I am very aware that like that data is only being shown to other users of this particular app, and it's not being shared back with like the agencies or, you know, back with other apps and everything. And, you know, and there's of course like a bunch of, you know, user privacy that's like tied up in that as well. You know, you don't like, so, you know, it's there's a give and take to everything, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. There is definitely, right? Any public company has to figure out a way to keep its head above water and be profitable and grow as a company. But I think what makes the public transit field so interesting is that because it is such a give and take and a balance between the public operators, the public agencies, and the private companies, the terms of engagement are, I think, because they are built around these standards and when they are built around these standards, help make sure that the private interests in the space can survive and thrive, but not choke off the public interest.
Yeah.
They serve as more as a supporting rather than overtaking.
Exactly.
I will say from like a Metro Transit perspective, like having this open data standard, I mean, is just really strategic because it leaves our options open, that we include, like, does this stop have a shelter amenity information? Because all of our internal tools, like the trip planner at metrotransit.org or the staff in the contact center use, is also consuming GTFS data. And that was like very strategic, seeing like we know third-party apps are really popular. We know people are using Google and Apple and Transit app and many others. We want all of our eyes on the same data. So if we rebuild our internal tools to be using GTFS data, that means we have better data quality regardless of the app that customers are using. And we're never going to have sort of like a UI, UX design team that Google Maps has. But we can do our best, and we can make sure options are available to riders.
Yeah, and going off of what you said of using open standards, there is a lot of value there of being able to implement something like that, just because it's open, it's for anybody to use. It's just a lot of advantages of that. Similarly, when a few episodes ago we talked about OpenStreetMap and the benefits of having a very open mapping utility, and the advantages of it being that data being available for anybody to build whatever they want on top of that. And it's my understanding that Transit app does use OpenStreetMap data for some of their map data. And so when looking at the Transit app and seeing how the lines at the bus stops are, what is the overlap between how OpenStreetMap data and GTFS feeds work with aligning like bus stops or kind of other information? If you just kind of want to talk on how Transit app uses OSM data as a whole.
Yes, excellent question. So OSM is a big part of the app, and we use it in a few discrete areas. So when you plan a trip with the Transit app and you go from A to B, there's a transit leg, but then there's the walking leg to the transit stop and from the transit stop. We have our own trip planning engine that we built, but that engine uses the walk paths from OpenStreetMap, so we can know where sidewalks are and paths are that people can walk to and from transit. So updating, and we also, when we get an error, like for example, a user will say, this trip plan makes no sense. It's telling me to walk, from here to there to get to this bus stop that's actually across the street. That's usually an OSM error. And so we'll go in, look it up and say, oh yeah, that is an OSM error. And we'll update OSM so that we and others have the correct info. We also use OSM for our bike routing, which is something we launched last year. Yeah. And our bike routing uses OSM to know where the bike paths, bike lanes, and streets are. And then our own trip planner engine will then use that to come up with routes that prioritize safety and then mark where protected lanes are, where greenways are, and then also identify potential high traffic streets, so you know before you get to them that it might be a potentially risky area. We're very proud of our bike directions. Safety-focused bike directions is not something that the giants of the field like Google Maps have traditionally focused on. So,
and it's not something
if you
that
use the transit app,
even other like bike specific, navigation apps that use OSM data, like hardly any of them will highlight the way the transit app does. Like, yeah, when am I going to be on a fully separated bike lane? And, I was so blown away when you like launched that feature, and I was like, wait a minute, this is actually like better than any other tool that I've ever used. Which is a wild thing to get right on the very first try.
Well, it took a lot of effort internally and testing to get to that point. As you might imagine, obviously at Transit we are transit riders, but we are also bike riders, and so we were kind of able to test it quite a bit in our real lives, and we also shared it with folks at different cities, like bike programs in different cities, to say, hey, we're planning this new feature. Could you are the local expert in your city. Would you be able to give it a test and tell us what we're getting right, what we're getting wrong? And that helped us identify one, OSM errors. If it's something that we could fix in OSM, that was great. And secondly, it helped us identify, okay, maybe there's a tweak we should be making to our trip planning engine. One of the things we found early on is that we were telling people to make a lot of turns because we were trying to prioritize safer streets. And just from a user perspective, it was like, this is too many turns. This is unrealistic. I'm going to miss one. I'm going to forget it. It's not helpful. And so then we adjusted accordingly based on that feedback.
You also added like not just walking to and from transit stops, but also like having bike as a travel mode, on either end of like a bus route. Is there any particular thing that determines whether that's going to pop up? Because it's, it doesn't show up for every single like route that I try.
Yes, that's a great question. So there's a few different factors here. I'll start with the transit app side of the equation, and then I'll go to the kind of transit agency side of the equation. So for our trip planner, we tend to prioritize biking to and from routes that are generally high frequency and high speed. So that tends to be light rail routes or express bus routes, where the advantage you get of going on board public transit in terms of speed and frequency is greater than what you would get from maybe doing a bike trip the whole way. Right. Because those of us who bike know biking is, often quite time competitive for a certain range of distances. And so for that reason, we prioritize kind of higher speed transit lines. That also helps reduce the load on our trip planning engine. So it's not crunching every possible combination, but the ones that would be the most useful. The second half of the equation is there's an option in the app to take your bike at the first leg and at the last leg of the trip. So from your origin and to your destination. You could switch it so it only goes from your origin to the transit, and then you leave your bike at a station, let's say, and then take transit the rest of the way without your bike. The default setting in the US for the app is bikes on both ends, because it is rarer for people to bike to a train station in the US, park it at the train station, and then commute to the center city. Whereas if you're in, let's say, the Netherlands, that's very common, right? So that's why the default is different in the US. In order to know if you can take a bike on public transit, there is a field that agencies can fill out in their GTFS called Bikes Allowed. And it just says basically, yes, you can bring a bike on this transit trip, because that's not possible on every transit trip. But most agencies in most places have racks on the front of their buses. They allow bikes on board, certainly at most times of day for most agencies. And so communicating that through your GTFS allows us to know, yes, we can have someone take a bike on board and then complete the rest of their trip on bike.
Nice.
Time to shout out that in the Transit App Riders Choice Awards, Metro Transit came in first in the riders most likely to also go by bike, scooter, or car share. So congrats to a very multimodal region.
There we go. Stephen, you mentioned that, your team will go and update like OpenStreetMap data if you find out that like, oh, hey, there's some errors in that data set that need to be addressed. And obviously, like, any end user can also update OpenStreetMap data, and that will be reflected in the transit app. How often are you refreshing, your pool of OpenStreetMap data? Because sometimes, it can be disheartening for an OSM editor to like, get started, edit some stuff, and then it never sees the light of day for months and months.
So we update maximum every couple of days, every few days. Okay. So if you make an edit, by the end of the week, it should appear in the app at the very latest. So the way the app works on the back end is when you open the transit app, we download information for not only your transit agency, that is the static GTFS schedules, but also the OSM data. If you have a data connection, we download that. And then all of that is then available offline. So if you lose connection for any reason, you can continue to use the transit app, both for bike directions, walking directions, and public transit schedules.
Ian from the future here again. We asked Stephen what OSM editor his team uses, and he had to get back to us after the recording. They do use the default id editor. What other data sources are you using for like place names, for example? Like I've noticed that like when I enter in a place name into the search field, that oftentimes like the stuff that pops up doesn't match up with what is listed in OpenStreetMap.
That's right. So for place marks, we use Google on Android, and we use Apple Maps on iOS. So when you were searching a destination, we use the APIs from each of them respectively.
Interesting.
Depending on the platform.
Is that based on the app installed on your phone or just the services that the phone is connected to?
That should be based on your OS.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that would be, so like Google Play services would provide whatever location, yada, yada. Okay. Interesting.
So as we've talked about here, there's a lot of very useful back and forth between Metro Transit, MnDOT, and Transit App on what information is being shared, what kind of things are being developed, and continue to improve the systems for pretty much everybody involved. In the process of having this connection, working on all this sort of stuff, I'd like to know how has this greater access to information, further development informed future decisions at all of the agencies involved, and like what has that led to an understanding for what's next for everybody involved?
So you mentioned on-demand service discovery and direct booking is coming soon. Another thing that we're really excited about is called trip modifications or real-time detours. As a transit rider and even somebody who works at Metro Transit, detours can be really confusing, really disorienting. It's really hard to parse alerts, especially if you're not able to read English well and decipher transit jargon well. And so trip modifications is a real-time format for specifying like detour shapes. And we're working with some of our operations software providers to be able to publish this data. Transit app, again, being kind of on the leading edge of this, already can consume it. And as like a Royale partner, we'll be able to make this available to users in the region. So anticipating the first half of this year, hopefully in time for construction and special events season, better data will be available to riders through this open data format.
So on the MnDOT side, we just rolled out 6 transit agencies the first of the year. various places throughout the state, and getting them on the platform for the transit app. We're currently working with Arrowhead, which is one of our larger transit providers in the state, covering, I think it's 10 or 11 counties. So up in that northeast corner area, as well as Marty, which is our autonomous vehicle that's up in Grand Rapids, getting their information on the transit app. And then we have another 15 transit agencies that are on the schedule for later this summer and into the fall. So ultimately, for MnDOT, we'll have most, if not all of our transit systems, I don't want to jinx myself, by January 1 of 2027. And so, barring issues with data, issues with, best laid out plans, how it is. But then also MnDOT will be looking at really marketing and providing marketing support to our transit agencies as well, understanding that our transit systems have small staffs, and limited IT technology, but also the marketing staffs behind it. So how do we get it so that it's kind of a statewide message? So the transit app is available, tokens available in markets for payments. It's one platform to help out. But then also too, on the website, we have our mntransitplanner.com website as well to, be able to get on, a laptop or a tablet and be able to find that information even before you get on your app as well too. So a couple different platforms and movement, but we're excited for 2026 with the state and moving this project along.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier the kind of long distance trip planning was something that really pushed us thanks to MnDOT and its needs. And that's something that's useful for transit, not just in Minnesota, right? But Ontario is restarting its Northlander train, which requires long distance trip planning. We are expanding quite a bit in France, and the SNCF, and its kind of train service requires longer distance. So for us, it's actually been really interesting and great to push the app forward in new ways. And for Metro Transit, on the Rate My Ride side of the equation, we are working to put more and more information into Transit Terminal, so that we can share more easily with transit agencies what riders are saying and what's happening, as opposed to just kind of sharing an export of a CSV file with a bunch of responses, right? Having a dashboard that you can use to navigate that data, and eventually making a version of that kind of more open to the public, right? We already share some of that information through the app with what people are saying, but our goal is to really make Transit Terminal a useful kind of web format for the information that's coming through Transit app. So I think that'll be a thing to kind of keep your eyes on going forward.
Nice. Well, Stephen, Kathy, Laura, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having us and for all of your interest and support and for riding with us. Thanks for riding with us.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of the Streets.mn podcast. The show is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Non-Derivative license, so feel free to republish the episode as long as you are not altering it and you are not profiting from it. The music in this episode is by Eric Brandt and the Urban Hillbilly Quartet. This episode was hosted and edited by me, Ian R. Buck, and was produced and transcribed by Parker Seaman, aka Strongthany. Thanks to our Mastodon followers, Pine, Street Meme, MO4, and Ang for sending in questions for us to ask. We're always looking to feature new voices on the Streets.mn podcast, so if you have ideas for future episodes, drop us a line at podcast@streets.mn. Streets.mn is a community publication and relies on contributions from audience members like you. If you can make a one-time or recurring donation, you can find more information about doing so at streets.mn/donate. Find other listeners and discuss this episode on your favorite social media platform using the hashtag StreetsMNPodcast. Until next time, take care.